for attending today's press conference. The purpose of this, by the way, I'm Beth Sherman, the Executive Director of the Chamber of Commerce. The purpose of this meeting is to bring awareness to our state legislators to make education funding fair for our rural communities. With us today, we have Randy Zimmerly, Superintendent of Westview School Corporation, Eva Merkel, the Interim Superintendent of Lakeland School Corporation, Jeff Reed, Superintendent of Prairie Heights Schools, Jody Disler, gosh, I screw up your name every time, bless your heart. Jody Disler, Parkview LaGrange Hospital, Sandy Sturts Ringler, President of the LaGrange County Chamber of Commerce. We have Jody Holsinger, broker with Real Living Homes and Beyond, and Laura Torneman with the EDC. Laura must be running a little bit late. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. At this time, I'd like to introduce Sandy Sturts Ringler.
Good afternoon. I'm the president of the LaGrange County Chamber. And as the LaGrange County Chamber, we are a strong networking platform with businesses in our county. And we work together to make a great place to live, work, and play and learn. We would hate to see that disappear. Thank you.
Next up, I'd like to introduce Eva Merkel from Lakeland School Corporation.
Thank you, Beth. I'm going to kind of give a global perspective, and my colleagues are going to give a little bit more detail on some of these areas. But echoing Great Place to Learn, we're all part of a great county system of schools, and we focus on nurturing and preparing kids for an uncertain future. That is our job now, because back in the day, we kind of knew how things worked, but everything changes very quickly these days. So what, in all of our schools, we start off with elementary and junior high, providing a very solid foundation, focused on growth, whether it's authentic experiences, project-based learning, basically building basic knowledge for all our kids so they are ready. One thing you've been hearing about most likely is that educators in the area and in Indiana are pushing for NWEA as a measure of student growth. We have all been using the standardized testing system, and it basically determines where students should be at a particular grade level, not recalibrated year after year as new tests roll out, which is what we've been experiencing at the state level for the longest time. So when you hear NWEA, that's why we are pushing for that. We're confident in that testing system in our schools. Once our kids get to high school, and that's obviously a focus of mine because my other hat is principal at the high school, we build on that strong foundation that we give our kids in elementary and junior high. So again, preparing students for wherever their future might take them. Strong core 40 standardized curriculum that we provide for them. College prep across the board in our schools. We add them all together. Our school students can get 199 dual credits, college credits, before they even walk out of high school. Our vocational students across the board, across the county, almost 10% of our students are at our area vocational program at Impact, getting great life skills training. And we also, in our individual schools, have individual programs, whether it's for agriculture, family, consumer sciences, Project Lead the Way, construction, or the arts, where students can get additional training. So we are all about the vocational training that you hear our governor talking about, and we've been doing it for a long time. And also, across the board, in each of our schools, lots of opportunities to excel in the arts, sports, clubs, and so forth. Support. We have strong business ties. Over 400 businesses in the area are part of our chamber, and there are others in the community who mentor and offer internships for our students. We continue that same testing with NWEA that, again, we're proposing. It's something that we're used to. It emphasizes actual individual student growth, and that's why we're proposing it. And we have strong post-secondary ties. Those college credits come from University of St. Francis, Ivy Tech, IPFW, IUPUI, IU, and Purdue. We have to partner with those. So again, strong partnerships locally for our kids. So what we want from our legislators and what we are suggesting is that they understand the hard work we do every day. We work tirelessly every day to provide the best education possible. We have our legislators who are there to make the wise choices. That's why we elect them. And so we want them to work with us and dialogue with us to help us make our jobs easier and better for kids. Growth means supporting the process. In vocational funding specifically, supporting the process, not the end product. Kids are still learning and developing, and so we encourage our legislators to do that for educators. Supporting a growth-based testing system, again through NWEA. It's a cost-effective way to provide that one piece of data. We have so many other pieces, and we have very competent educators who know how to work with that and make our kids better. So finally, what we are asking is that our legislators be wise and hear what we need and work with us. be fair for all children, including rural communities just like ours, and to be consistent. Stop the moving target of finances, which again will be discussed at length here shortly, as well as testing. Give us a testing system that is consistent, we know what to strive for, and to trust us to do the job we do best, be educators and take care of all our kids. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Eve. Next up, I would like to introduce Jordy Disler from Parkview LaGrange Hospital.
Well, thank you. I truly appreciate everybody being here because a strong educational foundation is the strength of a community. I think all of us have a memory of an educator that influenced us somewhere along their lives. And, you know, just talking to these educators up here right now, that brought back memories of me in my high school years, knowing that I wanted to go into healthcare. And I can still name you the instructor that challenged me every bit of the way, but I just truly knew by working with them where I wanted to go, and they helped me get there. And we cannot lax on that. We need those support. I represent Parkview LaGrange Hospital, and at the hospital we collaborate with our local community schools in the county here to make sure we have programs that we partner with them. We feel that it's essential to support the knowledge and the growth of our young leaders. A strong educational system is the pillar on which a healthy community is built. And that's part of my mission, and our mission at Parkview is to improve the health of our community. So it's essential that we continue to support our schools in any way that's possible. Our schools truly hold our future, and we need to make sure we're doing everything possible to give them that support and that nourishment. You know, you're preparing them for an unknown future. You know, we need to make sure they have that foundation because we want them to be an active member in our community, and that's done through strong educational systems. So thank you for everything you guys are doing.
Next up, I'd like to introduce Dr. Randy Zimmerly, Superintendent of Westview School Corporation.
Thank you, Beth. I have a number of comments that I want to make. Most of them are related to finances, and they include facts and some figures. And I want you to understand that these facts and figures are based on the House-approved budget bill formula. It is now in the Senate, so there are changes that are anticipated. In fact, there's already been a simulation that's come out with some new ideas that the Senate is looking at that is making this formula somewhat better. But these facts and figures that I'm going to share with you are based on the original simulation that did pass out of the House and is right now under consideration in the Senate. On March 15, 2015, Chris Turner of the NG Star stated, "The proposed changes to the state's school funding formula would take money away from both charter and traditional public schools that serve needy students and redirect it toward wealthier schools." The only correction that I would make to that quote is that the House-approved school funding formula takes money from rural schools in LaGrange County as well. Since 2009, the General Assembly has been reshaping school funding. Each odd number year, school districts' general fund calculations are determined, typically on the 23rd hour of the last day of the General Assembly session. School districts, we need a stable funding formula that includes an inflation factor, that includes a factor for inflation. We don't need an ever-changing school funding formula that determines financial winners and losers every 2 years. Our LaGrange County schools right now are losers in the current House-approved funding formula. The question would be why? This is not solely due to changes in enrollment, as some people would want you to believe. There are two major changes taking place in the formula that are not at all related to enrollment. The first one is transition to the base. Over the last number of years, there has been a change, or there is a difference in what a base funding formula amount is. For some school districts, it was higher. For some, it was lower. For a multitude of reasons, this happened over time. It has been the goal. There was a 7-year process designed to bring all schools, basic funding formula back to the same level. There's a set amount of dollars for each student based on complexity in this foundational grant. Some schools' basic grants, like I said, are higher than others. Now, as schools transition down, that means that there's more money available for the basic grant. In funding year 15, 147 out of 360 school districts are still transitioning down to the base. The loss of funding due to this impacts Prairie Heights by over $180,000 each of the next 2 years. Lakeland and Westview, we are already at the base, but $180,000 to Prairie Heights is what this does over the next 2 years, regardless of what their enrollment does. The complexity index is the other issue. The complexity index is based on the belief and the idea that some students are harder to educate or have more challenges than other students. So you can look at this as a lever. You have a student over here on one side who does not have challenges and is not considered complex. You have students over here who are complex. The question is how much more money does it take to educate a complex student? At one time, it could be argued that the lever was tilted this way, that too much money was going to educating complex students and not enough money going to educate students who were not complex. Well, you beg to understand what makes a student complex. Here we're getting into the whole issue of what's happening with school funding this year. The definition of what is complex is being changed. It used to be, many years ago, going back almost 20, that complexity at the state level was determined by what the federal level considered to be complexity. That went out the window over 10 years ago. Traditionally, in Indiana, over the last 10 years, complexity was measured by free and reduced lunch eligibility. That was changed 2 years ago, where they decided that no longer was free and reduced lunch to be considered. Then they were only concerned a year ago was free textbooks, because that could be audited. Okay? This year, they're looking at complexity as only free students. Why does that matter? For Westview, we tend to have a larger number of our students who qualify for reduced lunches than qualify for free lunches, because we belong to a community in LaGrange County where people typically are willing to work even if it's a menial job or perhaps a job that's below their qualifications because they believe in work. When they have made the decision that we're going only by free lunches, it then penalizes a community like ours, because people who are out there willing to work for maybe a lower income job, that no longer is rewarded. We are no longer being rewarded for that in terms of them qualifying and being eligible. So in the current formula, by going completely free, that has impacted us in a negative way. The other thing that has happened in the formula this year is, instead of just changing the definition of what is a complex student, the other thing that has happened is that they have decided that the factor that complexity is taken by is now an arbitrary number. It used to be the full basic grant amount was taken by the complexity index to generate an amount of money. Currently, what they've decided to do is that that amount was too high. They chose an arbitrary amount of $4,000. Remember our levers. Over here is complexity, and perhaps we were paying too much for a complex student. Over here is a general ed student. Perhaps we were paying too little for a regular student that's not considered complex. Well, what seems to have happened, they changed the definition, then they chose an arbitrary amount. The question is the lever now tilted too far the other direction? You make the decision. Currently, I'll read through my notes here. Free and complexity factor based on free-only qualifiers is multiplied by this arbitrary amount, $4,000. Again, the reason for using this is to raise the amount going into the basic grant, leveling that lever a little bit, evening it out. This helps schools with increasing enrollment, but hurts schools with the most needs who have declining enrollment. If the value of a complex student rises, there's less in the basic grant, and the opposite is also true. Well, what's happening in LaGrange County? The way the lever is currently tilted in the House-approved budget remember, it's under review, probably will be changed, but in the current House-approved budget, the way that it is currently figured, LaGrange County is going to lose over $2.3 million in our complexity formula. That's when you look at the complexity line from last year compared to the complexity line in the simulation, our losses on that line are $2.3 million. Caveat here, that some of that money is going into the basic grant amount, because remember, the basic grant amount is more, we also get that. So it's not a pure loss of $2.3 million, but we have lost $2.3 million on the complexity line. Lakeland, for example, is due to lose $1,004,519. Westview's change appears to be $899,293, and Prairie Heights' change on the complexity line appears to be $455,954. This shift, for the most part, is going to growing schools, some of who are receiving over a 10% increase in funding based on the current House-approved budget. We believe that for LaGrange County, that lever is now shifted too far in the House-approved budget, and it needs to be leveled up. Another thing that has happened with state funding is the state took over the general fund. In 2009, the Indiana General Assembly removed local property tax support from the tax formula for schools and increased the sales tax to 7%. Indiana schools then accounted for about 51% of the state's budget. This is one thing that you may be hearing. Over 52% of this budget is going to schools, and you're supposed to feel good about that. Well, let me help you understand something. When the state took over 100% of the general fund, by increasing our sales tax by 7%, taking more money from this community and sending it to Indianapolis, that put our amount of money of our general fund going to education at 51%. That placed us at 28th in terms of state money going to education. We were 28th in the nation. Very mediocre at best, at 50% of general fund state revenue going to education. Now, if you ask me, that's nothing to be all that excited and proud of. So when you hear that statement made, question, well, what do the other states do? Don't you think that that would be important? That is lower than half nationally. Schools facing financial shortfalls at that time when the state took over the general fund were at that time now given the opportunity to go to their local communities and ask for general fund referendums. In other words, the state made the decision, we are not going to raise taxes, we are going to continue to cut the amount of money that goes to schools, but we will allow schools, local communities to raise their own taxes. Just don't blame it on us, I think might be one of the comments. The other thing that happened with funding is on November 2 of 2010, Indiana voters approved the Indiana constitutional measure implementing property tax caps. Implemented caps went into effect at 1% of assessed value for owner-occupied residences, 2% for residential property. Other than owner-occupied, that would be your rentals, and agricultural land was hammered at 3% for businesses and personal property. Additionally, capital projects, bus replacement, bus maintenance, continue to have rate or levy caps. One of the suggestions that we're looking at that we believe would help us is if they would, because we have an overall cap, these other funds underneath that, if those caps for those funds underneath that could be eliminated, which would allow us more flexibility and freedom on where to spend money within those caps. Several local schools are seeking members of the General Assembly willing to offer legislation next year to remove individual caps on our 3 funds that operate. These are property tax collected funds that operate under that property tax cap that is now constitutional. Rate of inflation. In 2010, the state average amount of money that we got per student was $5,727. From 2010 to 2015, the U.S. has seen an inflation of about 8.4%. The new funding formula under consideration has our state ADM at $5,982. If U.S. inflation was included in the funding calculation, if inflation was counted, then we should be, the funding per student should be at $6,208. with state surplus growing to over $2 billion, would it be possible that our legislators could increase our per pupil funding at a rate that will allow us to at least keep up with inflation without harming rural and public schools? Caleb Whitmer of the Indianapolis Star developed a comparison of ADM per student school district. We attempted to do a similar thing here. If you look at the state amount of funding, the state average of $57.27 in 2010, it goes to $58.92 in 2017. Westview, as an example, in 2010, we were below the state average at $56.86. In 2017, we are projected to actually go down in per pupil spending to $55.507. If we would take that the state average amount times our ADM, this would generate a loss of us of $1,058,775. Lakeland is in a similar position. They would be behind the state average by $111,000, and Prairie Heights would be behind the state average by $286,000. As a county, after the next biennium, under the state-approved budget, we are $1.5 million below where we would be if we would be receiving the state average. We talked a little bit about ISTEP testing, talking specifically about our suggestion that we would look at NWEA or some other type of test that would be consistent, would be helpful, and would actually benefit us as a school, as school people, giving us useful information. ISTEP testing on March 11th, 2015, the Associated Press released a story about Indiana testing contracts. The report stated that awards totaling $134 million were authorized by the Indiana Department of Administration. This is $127 per student. That's just going to the testing company. That does not figure in what is the cost of a teacher's salary as they stand in front of a class administering a test instead of teaching. Doesn't talk about the cost of the technology that's in the computer lab that is not being used for educational purposes because it's used for testing. We don't need to spend $127 per student on testing when we have competent classroom teachers that can already identify student strengths and weaknesses. Every school district in our county has additional assessments that we are forced to purchase because the state changes the state test every year, therefore making it impossible to make comparisons year to year for students or make comparisons for a teacher from year to year in terms of effectiveness. We already have to go buy our own tests. Why are we spending $127 per student for something that has absolutely no help? It provides us with nothing. For your information, $127 times our LaGrange County ADM, our number of students, public school students of 5,507, would equal $699,000 that could come to us to hire teachers and actually provide more instruction for students. Some final comments real quick. How did we get here? This is some opinion things, and I am not necessarily representing Westview in these thoughts and opinions. I believe, having spent 17 years as a superintendent, I believe that what I've seen is the national discourse, and many of the things that are happening nationally are getting adopted by our state. The national and what I would consider urban and suburban focused agendas that have to do with education, based on good reasons. There are failing schools in some of those places. But that agenda is being extended beyond the problem areas and is now impacting rural areas, solid educational school districts in a very negative way. I believe that the leadership of our prevailing party in Indiana right now is not providing the amount of information that our local legislators need to make good decisions. I believe that our local legislators need to slow things down, need to look more closely at the legislation that's being proposed to them from the governor's office, from national agendas, from the governor's office, from the leadership within the party, and they need to slow stuff down, they need to look at it. There needs to be a healthy debate and discourse taking place within the caucus itself of the prevailing party, because obviously right now it is not happening because we are not in a bipartisan position down at the General Assembly. It needs to happen within the prevailing party itself, and some leadership has to emerge out of the prevailing party so that that discourse can happen. We need to have legislation, again, is moving too fast. It's resulting in what's been termed by a number of the legislators that I have talked with, well, that's as an unintended consequence. One of our fourth grade teachers made a statement in a meeting a number of weeks ago. When they changed the bargaining laws, I kept quiet because that affected me. But now they're affecting my kids, and I'm not going to remain quiet anymore. And I think that is the position that we have gotten to as superintendents. We can sit by, we can understand that school is big money and it needs oversight, but now you are starting to affect our kids. And you are impeding our ability. If this funding formula would go through, it is seriously impeding our ability to provide good, solid educational programs for the students in LaGrange County. And that concerns us greatly. Again, we appreciate your attendance and support. And as Eva said, we look forward to providing a great place for kids to be educated in LaGrange County. I do appreciate your enduring my talk about money. Some of you may have enjoyed that, and I'm sure some of you didn't, but thank you very much.
Next, I would like to introduce Jody Holsinger. Jody is a broker with Real Living Homes and Beyond.
Well, that's a tough one to follow, because now my blood pressure is up. It wasn't until I got to that, because really the heart, I think, of a community is your schools. Whether anybody realizes that or not, I actually had the privilege of serving 8 years on a school board, probably 15 years ago. My last year was in 2000, so it was in the 90s. And those 8 years were very informative. It made me realize what's going on in our community, and sometimes those are your biggest places of employment, is through the schools. But what I'm going to talk to you about is not from school board perspective, but actually real estate. And I think that, and a lot of this you probably already know, but some of this I actually went online and looked at some stats. I belong to the Realtor.com, and it's a huge organization and also a place to put homes. They do a lot of surveying throughout the United States. It's a national website. The home buying population clearly values local schools. Realtor.com recent survey of 1,000 prospective home buyers throughout the nation showed that 91% said schools were definitely one of the #1 searches in their criteria. So they are going out and looking outside. They're looking at sites that show their local school systems, what's available in that area. So if they brought up LaGrange, those school systems would come up. They're looking at lots of things, not just test scores and things, but maybe their children are involved in a sport, whether it be soccer, whether it be football, whether it be academics, whether it be a Future Farmer of America program, whatever it is, they are looking out there. So buying a home, even without children, is still an interest for resale value of a home. Even if you don't plan on using the school systems, maybe they're older, they're retired, living in the area, we still want to get them involved in our schools. I always advise the clients to support the local school systems, even if they don't have children, because it will help the children and also bring up the value of their property. They should have a vested interest in the school systems, even if they don't have children in them. Buyers do their homework online, like I say, credentials, locations, course offerings, test scores, sports offered in the schools, even pupil to teacher ratios when they're shopping for homes. Maybe you didn't know all this information, but it really comes back to each real estate office and what we have and the information we have to offer. Quite more than you really think as far as that goes. And clearly, though, consumer demands are large enough that we conclude that good schools do increase home values to some measure. Making a decision on buying a home should definitely include an analysis of all of our local schools, even for buyers who don't intend to send their children to those schools. And the final comment, and this was just also in everything I wrote, but they always finalize it, good schools, local schools, provide stability for the community. And that's good for the property values for everyone that lives in the area. So if they don't think that these two don't correlate and go hand in hand, people are wrong, and that just really raises my blood pressure when you hear about all those numbers. I'm thinking, because it really, whatever happens will affect our homes and some of our homes in our local area.
Jody? Next up, I would like to introduce Jeff Reed, the superintendent of Prairie Heights Schools Corporation. Sorry.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Beth, for organizing this for us, and Randy and Eva, and all the other participants, and all of you. Appreciate you coming out here for this today. There's been a lot of talk recently on school budgets and school financing, and Randy did a great job of explaining that. I'm sure everybody followed all of that, right? So, it makes my head spin. Anyways, but I'm going to give a few specific comments related to Prairie Heights just to kind of back him up on what he's saying. As a first-year superintendent, I don't have the historical background knowledge of budgets 3 years ago, how it worked 5 years ago, 8 years ago. But I continue to hear superintendents across the area say we're receiving we're receiving less money now per student than we did back in 2009. If that's the case, it just doesn't make sense to me how that happens. This school year, 2014-2015, we were down to $160 per student. That's not enrollment, that's students who walk in our door. We were down to $160 compared to what we were getting for them in 13-14. As Randy pointed out, that was almost close to $200,000 loss for us. Next year, we're forecasting a decrease of 1.4%, which is another $100,000 hit to us. But the good news is, the year after that, we're expected to get a 0.1% increase, which is about $4 per kid. So we get hit with $200,000 loss, $100,000 loss, and we get $4,800 back. Doesn't do much for us. But this leads me into what my main concern is, and that's our teachers. I think Randy and Eva would both agree with me that the teachers are the backbones to our schools. Again, I'm going to talk specifically about Prairie Heights, but I'm sure Randy and Eva can say the same things about the teachers in their districts. My teachers are the reasons why I fell in love with Prairie Heights. That's the reason why I've chosen to stay there, and the reason why I hope to finish my career there. Not only are they great teachers, but they're great people. I can give you many, many examples of how they have spent their own time, their own money, to help our students inside and outside the classroom. And again, I know that happens at Westview and Lakeland on a daily basis as well. My teachers are the reasons why we've improved our test scores over the last couple of years, and they have significantly improved, and it's because of them. Right now, in my opinion, I think we have the best teachers, K-12, in the 8 years that I've been at Prairie Heights. But that leads me to my concern of, I'll come back to that one. Let's talk about teachers as a whole real quick. Teachers across the board have experienced many good things, bad things over the last couple of years, but they're constantly having new things thrown at them. Evaluations, accountability. I'm not against accountability. I'm for accountability as long as it's done right. Right now it is not. You can't have accurate accountability when you're constantly changing standards and tasks and then comparing them to the previous year. New evaluations. I think the new evaluations have actually made us better. But when you talk about these things as a whole, they are new to teachers, and they're very stressful to our teachers. Common Core. I'd be real interested to see how much time and money that districts across Indiana spent getting ready for Common Core, and then, never mind, we're not going to do it. They've had their salary scales stripped from them. Most of the teachers in our districts came into education, and basically they were able to plan out their lives. They knew at year 1, I'm going to make this, year 8, I'm going to make this, year 18, I'm going to make this. That's been taken away from them. They've had changes to their contracts. We don't pay for master's degrees anymore. They've had changes to licensing. We had the whole testing fiasco from last year. This year we have a new test again. And already we found in our practice tests there were wrong answers for some of the questions. Gives you a lot of confidence going into this year's test. Teachers are going to be held accountable for this year's test, comparing it to last year's test, even though it's a new test and new standards. Not apples to apples, it doesn't make a lot of sense. They watched the dysfunction in Indianapolis and the power struggle between Glenda Ritz and the governor. Wrong and embarrassing. Yet we expect our teachers to come in every day, block all that out, deal with all the issues that our kids deal with, and teach them to the best of their abilities. And they continue to do that. My concern, and the concern of a lot of superintendents around the area, is how do we keep them? My teachers haven't had a pay raise since their 2010 contract. I have a lot of good young teachers who have been here for several years now, and they're still at the starting salary. teachers who want to get married, who want to have a family, who want to buy a house, and they're struggling to do that. We continue to lose money, and yes, we've lost some enrollment, but we're continuing to lose money per student. We're going through a staff reduction right now. 11 teachers are going to lose their jobs or have their contracts reduced for next year. We lost teachers to Michigan last year, where they were able to walk in the door and make a significant amount of their money. If we can't increase the pay for the staff that we have, we are going to lose them. I've had conversations with many of them over the last couple of years. I know they enjoy teaching. They love teaching. They enjoy being at Prairie Heights, just as much as they enjoy being at Lakeland and at Westview. But the cost of living is going up, their pay is not. Okay? They are exploring other options. They tell me that, and that's sad to hear. So how do you maintain your academic success or improve on your academic success if you're going to be shuffling staff in and out every year? It's not going to happen. None of our teachers went into this profession expecting to get rich. However, they did expect to make a decent living, where at least their wages reflected the cost of living, and right now it's not. These same concerns lead me to the future market of educators. I've talked to many educational chairs at local colleges and universities, and the enrollment in these programs is way down. And there's mixed opinions on that. I did come across an article the other day in the Indiana Economic Digest, written by a guy from Ball State. And he gives his opinion on why enrollment in these educational programs are down. One, I agree with him, and one, I don't. One of his reasons states, the big reason for enrollment declines is the end of the credential pay raises that mark the old teacher salary formulas. Again, their salary scale being stripped away from them. And I do agree with that. I think that has had a direct impact on people coming into the field and people leaving the field. There's another reason. Over the past decade, the educational reform movement has made great strides in eliminating the monopoly control of teacher licensing held by teachers' colleges. Today, if you love history and want to teach history, then you can learn that history is you can learn history in an actual history department and still get a teacher's license. And that's true, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I do disagree. That explains why there's been a huge decline in enrollment in educational programs. I believe the decrease is more on the pay and all the negativity that is going on with public education. Like the article that was written a few weeks ago in the Washington Post titled, "It's a Mess in Indiana." The article was about the problems with testing and the power struggles between the governor and Glenda Ritz. Okay? Not a glowing mark for Indiana's public education. The whole Common Core issue was very well publicized, again, negative towards public education. The Tony Bennett scandal, changing the grades, okay? Another black eye for public education. There's just been so many of these negative stories about public education, and it needs to stop. When I started administration 8 years ago at Prairie Heights, any opening that we had, I have had people help me. Let's go through all these applications. How are we going to narrow it down to the 3 or 5 people that we want to interview? Okay? This school year, I had some openings. I had nobody apply. 0. Okay? That's a huge concern for me. We had to go out and hire retired teachers. We had to hire some people who weren't licensed to teach. What is the market going to be like in the next 5, 10, 15 years? What is going to be the draw of young people into education? There's no doubt that you can send your kids to Westview, you can send your kids to Lakeland, you can send your kids to Prairie Heights, and they're going to get a great education. All 3 of us do great things. All 3 of us have had great success, and I have no doubts about that. I would send my own kids to any of those schools. But for the sake of our future, I hope the local legislators continue to hear our concerns related to funding, and I hope the DOE gets their act straightened out so we can get some consistency with standards and testing, if that's what we're going to be required to do. Our teachers need a clear mission of what their job is, not changing every year, and they just need to be allowed to focus on their jobs and instruct our kids, because they do a great job of that. In my opinion, education is still one of the most rewarding jobs out there. I can't imagine doing anything else. I just hope we get some help before we start losing great educators to other professions. Thank you.
We're way up there by Michigan. Who's LaGrange County? Who are we? Where are we? Are we just cord pickers? We don't know. Economic development is education and economic development is a very big factor. Is one of our key industries that when we have site selectors and those who come into our community to look for land or for buildings or bring their big business here, or Honeywell, They look at all aspects of LaGrange County, and one of those aspects is education. And if we don't have schools and we don't have teachers, we're off the list, which means the whole circle goes around. Every one of our jobs are affected by those who come into our community, who want to grow their business, who want to employ all of you. Every one of our lives are affected. So this is a huge concern for economic development, just like the students that are in the audience right now. You're hearing all of this today and you're getting part of it. And you're going to go home and you're going to finish school and you're going to go away to college or not. And then we're going to want you back here. But how are we going to get you back here if there's nothing for you here? We struggle with that in LaGrange County. That's one of our biggest issues. We're losing kids every time we turn around. And we applaud those who are coming back to our community and picking up their dad's business or finding out that Indiana is a great place for entrepreneurs. We have a lot of entrepreneurs in our community. And they start just because their dad taught them maybe how to whittle or how to build something. And they come back and they do that here, and we support that. But if they don't have the education behind them, and with these wonderful schools that we have here, we have nothing. So economic development is totally in support of all of you here and of our educators. Thank you.
Just to echo Laura, one of the goals of the chamber is to get young people back here into our community. Young people leave, they go experience college, they move to Indianapolis, that seems to be there's even a little LaGrange neighborhood, I believe, down there. But then they move back here to raise their families because they don't want to raise their families in the high crime districts and the hustle and bustle. They come back here. But why are they going to come back here if we don't have quality education to give them? They aren't going to want to raise their kids here. So the Chamber of Commerce recognizes that our county cannot produce skilled workforce of tomorrow unless our schools are able to successfully educate the students of today. So that is our main one voice here. We need our schools because if not, it is one big snowball effect. And we'll have a ghost county, basically. So are there any questions from the floor for anyone up here? Questions? Everybody understood what Terry said? Yeah, Tim.
I'd be interested in hearing the school folks talk about vouchers. I didn't hear much about that in the discussion of financing. We don't have a lot of schools maybe around here that are accepting vouchers so much, but how has it impacted the money that's no longer available to the districts?
Maybe that was the elephant in the room. We weren't going to go there, but since you did.
You asked for it.
Yeah. There is a debate between whether public schools are meeting the needs of students or not, and whether choice is necessary in order to provide an adequate education for kids. And I think what I want to start with is by saying that I think there are some situations in some places in particular where choice is absolutely essential. There are some places where there are students who are not getting a decent education, who do not have school districts the quality that you have in LaGrange County. I would contend that in LaGrange County, the quality of the education that you have, unless your purpose is religious and you are desiring a parochial education, unless that, I believe that you have a high quality, safe environment for your kids to go to school in LaGrange County, and our government has absolutely no business whatsoever trying to entice or encourage choice for people who live in our county. I think that that is a complete miscarriage and misunderstanding of what it means to support education for Indiana students. I know there's people that I respect that disagree with that. There are certainly people out there that disagree with that. I myself, I participated in a parochial education. I went to a Christian high school, Central Christian High School in Kidron, Ohio. It's a sister school under the Mennonite Board of Ed to Bethany, that many of you are familiar with. I am actually worried for that particular type of education because, believe me, once you get the money, you're going to get the strings. You no longer are actually independent, and it is coming. It may come slowly with the requirement for you to educate students with all disabilities, but soon there will be a comeuppance. And I think the question that I would have is why is it in the state of Indiana have we allowed our prevailing party, who was supposed to be conservative in their approach, they have created the largest social program and the largest dependency on government funds that I have seen in my 17 years in education. There are approximately what, 900,000 public school students, Brian, is that close?
A million.
About 1 million, and there's about 100,000 private school students. I think it's somewhere like that. We now have that 100,000 private school students who were not supported by government funding have now been added to the potential number of students that this government has obligated us as taxpayers to support. We have increased by 100,000. I'm sorry, but the hog will not butcher itself. It has happened. We are down that path. There are Catholic schools now in the South Bend and Fort Wayne area where more than 50% of their funding is coming from the government. That's a problem. Now, your question, I think, specifically was about money, and are we being affected by the money? I am not sure I can speak for these folks. We do not have a voucher-sponsored school district in our district. I do know that there are a number of schools in Elkhart County that are taking vouchers. I'm really not sure if there's any in LaGrange at all. There isn't in the Westview area. But across the state, the original voucher bill required that a student tried public education prior to being eligible for a voucher. Okay? That now has gone away. Now, and we went from about 15,000 students receiving vouchers. And again, I'm going to throw out numbers here, but please fact verify these. Broad numbers, and this came from a meeting I was in with some local legislators. But broad numbers, about 15,000 students receive vouchers. Now, because of some pretty aggressive marketing, and some of you have probably heard this on the radio, maybe you can run some of those ads, Tim, I don't know. But some pretty aggressive marketing, that doubled to over 30,000 kids receiving voucher money. The term that one of the local legislators used with me is that was unintended. That explosion of participation in the voucher program was not anticipated, and that was an unintended consequence of the bills that they passed. So, when you take that amount of money, yes, we now are getting, there is less money that's going into public education. So the effect on us is the fact that there is not more money created from the taxpayer unless they're going to raise our taxes. So the amount of money now is being divided by a larger number of people. Right now it's 900,000 plus an additional 30,000. You didn't ask about this, but I'll tell you anyway. Patrick Wilshire and I were talking about this just real quick beforehand. A specialized grant organization, some of you may have noticed on your tax forms this year, when you're doing your state taxes, that it did ask if you made a contribution to an SGO. I believe it's a specialized grant organization. You, as a taxpayer, could have made a contribution to an SGO, and that you, upon making that contribution to the SGO, would receive a tax credit on your Indiana taxes. So that's not a voucher, but that is a direct grant-making body that can then turn around and give grants to private and parochial education. And that is just one more thing. I don't even know if people are that aware of that. But the amount of money that is lost in terms of Indiana tax revenue that could be going to our general fund because of that tax credit. Again, it's not a deduction, it's a credit. The amount of money that's going there, I would love to know that amount of money. I know that some of the information that I read, that the typical donation to those SGOs is in the $500,000 range. Those individuals, probably fairly wealthy people, are having their entire tax bill wiped out by making contributions to an SGO. Now, that's of great concern to me. And it goes back to the whole concept that we talked about earlier. My guess is that's an unintended consequence that people would be able to completely avoid their tax obligation in Indiana. Perhaps it's unintended consequence, I don't know. But I would really believe that needs to be revisited by our legislators. It needs to be debated again, whether that is really true and whether that is really good in Indiana. There are definitely some concerns about it. So I hope that answered your question. I would love to get you more accurate information in terms of actual numbers. I don't know if you guys are prepared with that.
A little bit. As far as students in LaGrange County making use of vouchers, I believe Prairie Heights District has $28,000. So students using $20,000 in vouchers, and I believe Lakeland was $3,500 if I looked correctly. So as Randy said, don't quote me on the numbers, but something around there. So yeah, it is affecting us in LaGrange County. I will say this on charter schools. I'll put our education, like Randy said, I'll put our education against any charter school. No doubt, but and if they want to fund charter schools, fine. Just don't make it at our expense. And we shouldn't have to take the hit for that because they choose to fund that. I don't know if any of you heard this one too. I heard talks about this. Another thing for the vouchers, those parents who send their kids to private schools, charter schools, $1,000 tax credit towards textbooks, nothing for the public parents. So I don't know if that's going to pass or not, if you guys have heard that one, but that's something else I've heard talk about.
Jennifer.
So as we're emailing our legislators, can we get just a couple of people appointed? I mean, I've heard so much information today on a topic that I try to stay up on anyways, but how do I best summarize what we need and really what I should be saying so that my voice is heard and can affect that legislator's perception? Can that even come out as a follow-up piece? Because I think if we can make the message consistent too, and they hear it, I don't know, like how can we best utilize?
With similar situations, there's usually something drafted saying, hey, this is what we're asking, and to pass that on, we can get that out through our schools and the chamber.
Yeah. We'll follow up. Yes.
I could maybe answer her question. Go away. It's about what's happening in the state of Indiana. Our legislators are privatizing our public schools. This is where the money is going. I am a graduate of LaGrange schools, 12 years, my 5 siblings. My dad graduated from LaGrange in 1910, mom in 1914. And I had 5 years of graduate school in U.S. history at the University of Wisconsin, which was considered one of the top ones in the nation, in the top 3 at the time. Professor Jensen, Merrill Jensen, was the scholar on the colonial period. And it gets us back to privatization again and this voucher system. He told us in class that it wasn't really a revolution. We got our independence. 2 things about independence we changed. One was the separation of church and state. In Europe, they had established churches, tax money went to the government, and then they paid for their religion. We didn't. We had separation of church and state, and he said, not 1 penny of tax money should go for, in other words, the government is supposed to be neutral with regard to religion, not for or against it. This state, as has been pointed out, now through the legislature, we're giving more vouchers to charter schools than any state in the United States. Now, when this money comes out, then, as you all know, it's less money because the physical systems stay the same that you have to pay, you know what I mean? So you're getting less money, especially out of districts, for these vouchers. Now, true, the state Supreme Court rule is okay. Doesn't mean they were correct. Our U.S. Supreme Court in the 1890s, the system where they declared the Plessy versus Ferguson, separate was equal, they said in schools. And then in 1954, they flipped the Supreme Court, Brown versus the Board of Education. Segregation, you can't segregate schools. So I'm just saying, our state Supreme Court, I believe, is wrong. Their legislature is moving to privatize the schools a lot, and this is hurting public education a great deal. I'd also like to comment about, as a former teacher of U.S. history, and what we had in LaGrange County versus now. For instance, we had 40 in my class in 1950. But on US 20, the Scott family, Ross Scott next to the LA Express, 2 of his kids got PhDs in our little town and our little school system. And Dick's, his first job was at Harvard University. Pat was a professor in Wisconsin for years. Science fiction, she wrote articles with Isaac Asimov, the science fiction guy. My brother, down the road, he became a professor at Western Michigan, chemical engineering. My brother-in-law became a professor. He was a teacher at LaGrange. Jerry Johnson, the brother of Stell Carney, is a professor at Western. So this is what the type of education you can get in small districts where no one's coming down with all these tests, telling you what to do, and it's just a big difference. I would like to comment one other thing. I've donated 500 of my U.S. history. I taught 3,000 high school students in Alaska and hundreds of university students. I have an academic library, which I've donated 500 books here. I've checked with all the U.S. history teachers. And not one teacher, even in AP classes, requires their students to read any outside reading, which just appalls me. And yet these books are up here from my academic library, good ones that they could read. When I was talking to these teachers, I went to Lakeland High School, and I wanted to see the library, so I could donate some books to the library. I was appalled. They took the library away from students for another program, and they have a little room out there now with very few books. Books are the key to learning. Internet, fine, it's a tool, but it's not the answer for good learning. So we've really dumbed things down, I think. Finally, our former governor, Mitch Daniels, emails came out later that he was ordering in his emails that Professor Howard Zinn, Dr. Howard Zinn, Columbia University, his book called People's History of the United States, be taken out of all high school libraries in Indiana. This was appalling to me. It's like the Nazis burning books. That came from our own governor doing this. So we've got a problem, I think, with the politicians who are doing all these things, and it's not helping at all. So politics is very important because they're controlling now.
Any other questions? Yes, Patrick.
Patrick Wiltshire, LaGrange. I have 2 questions for the 3 superintendents. First one's pretty simple. Second one, maybe not. Before I do, I want to thank these students for being here. I don't know if you were forced to or not. They've kept their eyes open and they're paying attention, it seems to. So, first question is, are your school systems using the normative testing provided by NWEA? NWEA?
Westview is.
Okay. Yes. Okay. And despite the fact that you've used it for at least some time, was any consideration given to using that as opposed to the now infamous, not in a good way, iStep Plus?
Well, I guess I was involved with some of that. Basically, there's a couple of issues that you're dealing with. It's not quite as simple as us just adopting NWEA. NWEA does lack a little bit of a summative portion of the test, that there is a requirement from, again, this is where the federal gets mixed up with the state, which, so all this finger pointing can happen all over the place. So basically, No Child Left Behind requires that there be a summative evaluation system that currently the way NWEA is written is not adequate. The second problem that you have with NWEA testing, which is why part of the problem we're spending all this tremendous amount of money, is that we chose not to adopt Common Core. And when we chose not to adopt Common Core, that forces us now to create our own test. So while we encouraged and we wanted NWEA to be considered as a formative assessment, there is some question whether it could have been, and then there is some question as to how much does NWEA need to do to come up and match actually the Indiana content standards, because remember, we moved away from the national core curriculum. So anytime you move away from a core curriculum and you want to have a test that actually matches the standards you're teaching, when you teach your own standards, now you get to make your own test. that's part of the problem with trying to create your own standards. So maybe that's more of an answer than you wanted, but there's a little bit of complexity in that whole thing. Our belief is, and we as superintendents, the three of us, along with all the rest of the superintendents actually in our four-county area, signed a request to the DOE and the legislature to consider working with NWA, because we know as a company they're capable of providing us the technology and the immediate feedback necessarily to know how our kids do.
I have one other question. I'll get it out fast. And it's to all of you, but based on a comment Dr. Zimmerly made about this starting in roughly in Indiana in a big way in 2009 or so forth. First shot over the bow being property tax caps and taking over the general fund and so forth, putting education under the general fund. And I would agree with your comment that a lot of it was focused at the national level on primarily urban school districts, and maybe even at the state level, especially Indianapolis public schools. But for at least 6 years now that I've been watching this story unfold, it's been more about what this gentleman shared earlier, and that's privatization. Not only privatization through vouchers, but privatization through enabling creation of and support of more charter schools, which are largely owned and operated by for-profit management companies. So that this train left the station 5, 6, 7 years ago. Why are you only now standing up behind a podium and telling your constituents, parents, children, taxpayers like me, that all this is not right? Why now? Why not earlier?
I think it was echoed in a few comments. I think it's finally gotten to the point that we're seeing it adversely affecting children on a day-to-day basis. In a few meetings with business folks in the Fort Wayne area, I remember saying, they said, how can you get anything done? And we basically said, we go in there and we work hard, we know what's good for our kids, and we do that on a daily basis. Our teachers are good, our administrators are good, and we keep marching no matter what kind of craziness is going down in Indianapolis. And I think it's gotten to the point that it's become so, it's infiltrated our actual classrooms at this point, and now it's, educators tend not to be political. We're there for our kids, but it's to the point now where it's affecting the classroom, and I think we've all said enough. We have to say something, and we have to rally our communities to say that this is about our kids, and you're messing with our kids now. And before we could get around it, we play the game, we do what we needed to, we figure out what's the game for this test now we get it. And we did what we needed to without hurting the kids, but I think ultimately it's come down to, it's touching our kids, and we're not standing for it anymore. I'll let the gentleman echo that or contradict me.
That's a good response.
I think, first of all, like I said, I've been at this 17 years, and I think you're right, Patrick. I won't sit here and tell you that you're wrong. I think it would have been better, not just 6 years ago, but maybe 15 years ago, because I think it's been a national agenda for a lot longer time than that. I think the thing that I am finding, at least in the state of Indiana, is that there is a vigorous debate that happens on privatization when there is more of a balance in terms of powers, in terms of who is actually there. I think there will be, and that's the call that I guess I am making to our legislators, is that there will be a vigorous debate by our rural-led educators, by our public school supporting educators, regardless of whether they're in our prevailing party or whether they're in our minority party. I think that debate will start to happen by our legislators. So I think, while I do acknowledge that, it would have been better to be standing up and being much more vocal earlier, I think there was a level of trust that we had in our legislative process, that it's a complex process typically. Typically, it takes a lot of discussion, a lot of debate, and compromise in order to get a law passed. That is not the case in Indiana right now. We have a prevailing party that has critical mass. It has no need whatsoever to listen to an opposition view. And I believe what's happened the last 3 or 4 years is that opposition, without opposition, the leadership, be it from the governor's office, which I think we already alluded to, or leaders of the Senate or leaders of the House, simply are saying, okay, this is our agenda, everybody goes for it, boom, it happens. Now we've got our local legislators, whom I respect greatly. I want you to make sure you understand that. I think we have local legislators who have good intent. They're now having to fix problems that are unintended, that just were rammed through way too fast without vigorous discussion and debate. And so for me, that's the difference, is there is no debate. There is no group that can run off to another state and slow things down. None of that is in place anymore. We have to have the prevailing party be held accountable for what they've done to us over the last 2 years, and that's why I'm here. We need to make sure our elected officials who pass these laws, and I do want to emphasize, make a point here, it's the governor has appointed every member of the State Board of Education. We have one elected oppositional voice in this entire state, and that is Glenda Ritz, Superintendent of Public Instruction. Like her or dislike her, she is the sole person who is in the way of just ramrodding agenda through. There is a bill right now that has already made it through the House, and I don't know where it's going to end up in the Senate, that basically is going to try to strip her of some of her powers. That's of great concern to me. Not because I necessarily agree with everything that Superintendent Ritz is doing. I don't. However, there has to be vigorous debate and a study of what laws are being passed, because I'm sorry, these are not guinea pigs. These are young people who need to be educated so they can go out and get good jobs and go on to higher ed if they want, so that they can make enough money so they have a good future. But yet we're running laws through so quickly that unintended consequences happen. And I'm sorry, just like Eva said, do you know who it's impacting now? I'm sorry, it's not busting the unions, it's impacting our kids. And so, yeah, should have been here 6 years ago, potentially, but I'm not sure they would have been here 6 years ago. I think they would have been listened, but I don't know that we would have felt. I think we are at a crisis, and I think we're here because we're at a crisis. We need help at the national level. We need help within our state level. We are at a crisis. And it's not just about money. I hope you caught that. I talked money. Eva and Jeff, they were both looking at students, and Jeff was looking at staffing. Understand that it's not just about the money. It's about the testing policies, it's about the accountability, it's about what I would call, to a certain extent, the demonization of public ed. So something always has to get blamed if things aren't going well. And you know, right now, we've decided to demonize public ed and make that the bad thing. And private ed and parochial ed is the good thing. So how do we minimize the bad and maximize the good? That's the public discourse that we're having. It's what we've got to fight against. It's not what we believe, but yet that's what gets espoused and what gets repeated time and time and time again.
Any other questions? Dan? No? Yes.
I want to support the superintendents and the administrators by saying this. The stability of the high school and the elementary school and the middle schools is very, very important. Without stability and a good faculty that has that stability itself, which we're losing them because of the way situations are right now. When I retired from public education for 39 years, I left a wonderful, wonderful school. Jody was in that school. She was a good student. I got to say that or she'd be anyway. But no, she came as a good student. But we had so many people that came from unstable situations. I'm not saying all of them. But we had so many people that came from unstable situations in the home, split homes, emotionally disturbed. If it wouldn't have been for the stability of the staff, at that point, those students would be in jail. Instead of being in jail, some turned out to be lawyers, some turned out to be professors, teachers that came back and wanted to teach the same way that they were taught with stability. And the way things are going right now, there is no stability in the future for those students. The teachers had stability because the pay salary was stable. The teachers that were not good were weeded out, or should have been weeded. Canceled their school and take them down there and let's do some lobbying down at the State House. I'm suggesting, people, that you load up some school buses and go down to the State House and lobby. I saw a situation down there where a bunch of teachers had one person that was from their district, and they had him in a circle and he couldn't get out. He tried, but they wouldn't let him out. And that's what works. And the thing that is, we need to tell these legislators that if you're not going to do it, then we'll get somebody that will. But I feel, I hurt inside. I ache. I put 39 years of my life on the line for my students. And I have seen so many of them turned around and go, just like these people. They're turned around and going the other direction. Alcoholics in high school. There was one we had was an alcoholic, and he's got a degree in veterinary science. He's not an alcoholic anymore. He's a good father. And he came from a terrible home. That's the secret, stability. We've got to have stability in public school, and they're taking it away by doing the things that they're doing, like he said, privatizing public education, which is unconstitutional. And we need to sue the governor. I'm serious. You've got to get militant. If you're not militant, things aren't going to happen. I don't mean you go out there and you shoot people, not like that. I mean your attitude. But you got to get after them, and you got to tell them what you think. And it's not, well, we can put it on email. Email's worthless when it comes to this, because that's just email. They don't see it. They just, their aides come in and say, oh, you got a couple emails. Okay, what'd they say? Well, they're just talking about this and that. When you get them face to face, then you've got them. But we need stability in the public schools. Without stability, your students, your children, they're lost. And that's all there is to it.
Is there any other questions from the floor? Yes, Joanna.
Well, I would just like to applaud you superintendents for standing up for the kids today. Kids are not widgets, and you all know that. And too many times decisions are made based on that kind of a concept, a business model. And I think some of the comments here were spot on. And I think you making decisions, like you always do, based on what's best for the kids, will always be the best decisions. Unfortunately, the decisions that are made downstate are not based on that model of what is the best for a child. And too many times, we're going to see the destruction of not just LaGrange County, but across the entire Hoosier state. All of our kids, all of our families, all of our communities will be affected by this, like Laura Turman said. So I applaud what you're doing, and I think having this press conference and talking about those numbers, those hard figures that are so important for us to understand, it is a big deal, and it is at a crisis point. So I just really appreciate what you brought to the community today.
Okay. Thank you. This concludes today's press conference. Thank you all for coming. I'm sure we will draft a sample letter that they can send to their legislators.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much.
Next time, invite some teachers here, not only the administrators, teachers too.